The night was sharp-edged, like broken glass catching the moonlight. Snow flurries danced lazily through the air, dissolving into slush on the asphalt before they could settle. Lex Carter gripped the steering wheel of her black sedan, knuckles pale against the leather. The streets of Washington, D.C. stretched out ahead of her like veins beneath winter's cold skin, silent but pulsing with unseen life. Jazz drifted softly from the car stereo, a smoky saxophone weaving its way between the cracks of exhaustion that lined Lex's face. She reached over to turn down the volume, then hesitated. The music wasn't just background noise. It was armor. It reminded her who she was when the world tried to strip her down to something less than human. Tonight, Coltrane's My Favorite Things felt particularly fitting. A bittersweet melody for a woman navigating storms both personal and systemic. She glanced at the glove compartment where a folded piece of paper lay tucked away. On it, typed neatly in Times New Roman font, was Langston Hughes' poem, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun?" Her mother had given it to her years ago, back when dreams still seemed attainable. Now, the words were more question than answer, a reminder of everything she'd fought for, and how much remained unfinished. Her phone buzzed against the passenger seat. Another text from HQ, witness relocated successfully. Report back by 0600. Lex sighed, rubbing her temples. Witness protection missions always left her drained, not because of the danger, but because of the weight of other people's lives resting on her shoulders. Children too young to understand why strangers now called them by different names. Parents clutching photographs of loved ones lost to violence. And Lex standing between them and oblivion, bearing witness herself. Behind her, blue and red lights flashed suddenly, slicing through the darkness like knives. Her stomach tightened instantly, though her expression remained unreadable. Lex checked her rearview mirror. A police cruiser had pulled up behind her, its siren silent but its lights blinding. She slowed the car to a stop along the curb, rolling down her window as icy wind whipped inside. Her fingers brushed the holster at her side instinctively. Not out of fear, she never carried fear openly, but habit. Years spent anticipating worst-case scenarios had taught her caution was survival. A figure emerged from the cruiser, tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette framed by the swirling lights. He approached slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. When he leaned toward her window, Lex saw his face clearly for the first time. Mid-30s, white, with chiseled features softened slightly by fatigue. His nameplate read Hale. "Derek Hale?" "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice clipped and formal. But there was an edge to it, barely concealed disdain lurking beneath the surface. "License and registration, please." Lex reached into her coat pocket without breaking eye contact. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her tone was measured, calm, but not submissive. She knew better than to let authority intimidate her. "No problem," he replied, though his lips curved into a smirk that suggested otherwise. "Just routine." Routine. The word hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. Routine meant one thing if you were white and another entirely if you weren't. Lex had learned this lesson too many times to count. Still, she handed over her documents silently, watching as Hale examined them under the glow of his flashlight. "Carter," he murmured, dragging out the syllables as if tasting them. Then, louder, "And what brings you out here so late, Miss Carter?" "I work nights," she said simply. No need to elaborate. Let him connect the dots or fail to. His gaze lingered on her hoodie, dark gray and unassuming. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. Discomfort? Recognition? Whatever it was, it made her pulse quicken ever so slightly. "You might want to reconsider wearing that," he said finally, nodding toward the sweatshirt. "Bad optics these days." Lex stiffened. Bad optics. As if her choice of clothing somehow justified suspicion. She bit back a retort, reminding herself that arguing wouldn't help. Instead, she asked coolly, "Am I free to go, or do you intend to detain me further?" Derek faltered for half a second, caught off guard by her composure. Then his mask slipped back into place. "Step out of the vehicle, please." The command hit Lex like a slap. Step out of the vehicle. For simple words that carried centuries of weight. For a moment, she considered complying. After all, she'd faced worse indignities in her line of work. But tonight, something snapped inside her. With deliberate slowness, she unzipped her coat halfway, revealing the gleaming badge pinned to her chest. Beside it rested the butt of her service weapon. Derek froze mid-sentence, his eyes widening as realization dawned. Agent Carter, she corrected, her voice steel-wrapped in silk. Secret Service. You were saying. Color drained from Derek's face. He stammered an apology, stumbling over his words. I didn't realize. No, you didn't, Lex interrupted, zipping her coat back up. She pulled out her phone and began recording. Let's make sure we document this encounter properly, shall we? Derek shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado crumbling. Look, Agent Carter, I apologize. It was just a standard procedure. Standard procedure, she repeated flatly, letting the phrase hang there. Sure. Happens to everyone, doesn't it? The silence stretched taut between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. Finally, Derek stepped back, gesturing toward her car. You're free to go. Have a good night. Lex didn't respond. She rolled up her window and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the cold. Only when she was several blocks away did she allow herself to exhale fully. As Lex navigated the empty streets, her thoughts churned like storm clouds. That encounter hadn't been unusual, it was part of the fabric of her existence. But something about Derek Hale lingered in her mind. His reaction to her hoodie. The way his hands trembled slightly when he realized his mistake. There was a story there, buried deep beneath layers of training and denial. She touched the scar tissue on her forearm absent-mindedly, remembering the fire that had claimed so many lives, including those of children she hadn't been able to save. Every mark on her body told a tale of survival, resilience, loss. And Derek, he bore scars of a different kind. She could see it in his eyes even if he couldn't admit it aloud. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her reverie. This time, it was a voicemail from an unknown number. A distorted voice whispered cryptically, "They know what you did. Watch your back." Lex frowned, replaying the message twice before deleting it. Threats came with the territory. Yet something about this one felt different, more personal. Almost as if whoever sent it knew exactly which buttons to press. She turned onto her street, parking outside her modest row house. Before stepping out, she retrieved the folded poem from the glove compartment and tucked it into her pocket. Words were weapons, shields, lifelines. They reminded her who she was and who she refused to become. Inside, Lex poured herself a glass of bourbon and sank onto the couch. The city outside was quiet now, but she knew better than to trust appearances. Injustice didn't sleep, it merely waited for opportunities to strike. On the coffee table lay her husband's wedding ring, polished to a dull shine. She picked it up, running her thumb over the engraved date, March 12, 2016. 5 years since his death in Afghanistan. 5 years of carrying his memory like a torch, lighting paths others feared to tread. Tonight, however, the light felt dimmer than usual. The encounter with Derek Hale had unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't anger, it ran deeper than that. Perhaps pity, perhaps recognition, or maybe, just maybe, a spark of curiosity about the man behind the badge. As she sipped her drink, the saxophone solo from My Favorite Things played softly in the background. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled midnight. Another day survived, another battle won. But the war raged on, and Lex Carter wasn't done fighting yet. Morning light filtered weakly through heavy clouds, casting Washington, D.C. in shades of gray. The city stirred reluctantly, its streets slick with melted snow and the remnants of winter's grip. Inside her row house, Lex sat at the kitchen table, sipping black coffee while staring at the voicemail transcript she'd transcribed earlier. They know what you did. The message gnawed at her like a splinter lodged deep under skin, impossible to ignore, painful to remove. She tapped her pen absently against the notepad, tracing circles around keywords. Who were they? What exactly had she supposedly done? Her mind raced through recent cases, enemies made, lives disrupted. But nothing stood out as particularly damning, not recently anyway. Her gaze drifted to the wedding ring resting beside her laptop. It gleamed faintly in the dim light, a relic of happier days. For a moment, She allowed herself to remember Daniel, the way his laughter could fill even the emptiest rooms, how he always smelled faintly of sandalwood and ink. Then reality snapped back into focus. Daniel was gone, and so were the answers he might have provided. All that remained was her duty and her scars. She opened her laptop and typed 2 words into the search bar: Derek Hale. Lex wasn't surprised to find sparse public records about Derek Hale. Most police officers maintained low profiles online, wary of scrutiny. But buried within department archives and news clippings, fragments of his story began to emerge. Born to a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse, Derek grew up idolizing his late father, a Marine killed in action before Derek turned 5. At 18, he enlisted, following in those phantom footsteps. His military career ended abruptly after a botched raid in Afghanistan resulted in civilian casualties, an incident later classified but never forgotten. Afterward, Derek returned stateside, joining the Metropolitan Police Department in hopes of rebuilding himself. Yet redemption proved elusive. In 2019, during a routine patrol, Derek shot and killed a black teenager wearing a hoodie similar to Lex's. The boy had been unarmed, reaching for his phone when Derek fired. Internal investigations cleared him of wrongdoing, citing reasonable fear. But the damage was done. Nightmares plagued him nightly, each one replaying the same chilling question. What if I hadn't pulled the trigger? As Lex scrolled through documents, a pattern emerged. Derek's resignation letter hinted at unresolved guilt, though it lacked specifics. What intrigued her most, however, was a detail buried in witness statements from the 2019 shooting. Derek claimed to have acted based on faulty intel fed to him by higher-ups. Someone had manipulated the situation, ensuring Derek bore the brunt of public outrage, while others walked away unscathed. Lex leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Corruption within law enforcement wasn't new territory for her, but this case felt different. Personal. Derek's actions, or rather his motivations, resonated uncomfortably close to home. Like her, he carried burdens too heavy for any one person to bear alone. That afternoon, Lex visited the National Archives, poring over sealed files related to Derek's testimony in the 2019 case. What she discovered shocked her, evidence suggesting Derek had lied under oath to protect someone powerful. Testimony transcripts revealed inconsistencies, minute details omitted or altered that painted a picture far darker than official reports admitted. But why? Why would a man already drowning in guilt compound his sins by covering for another? Lex mulled over possibilities: coercion, blackmail, misplaced loyalty. Each explanation led back to the same conclusion: Derek Hale wasn't just a broken cop, he was a pawn in a much larger game. Meanwhile, across town, Derek wrestled with demons of his own. Sitting alone in his sparsely furnished apartment, he stared at an old photograph of himself and his mother taken outside their cramped duplex. He remembered her sacrifices, her endless prayers for his safety. How disappointed she'd be now, knowing the man he'd become. His eidetic memory served as both blessing and curse. Every face, every voice, every split-second decision replayed endlessly in his mind. Last night's encounter with Lex haunted him most. Her icy composure masked something raw beneath, a pain he recognized all too well. And her hoodie. God, her hoodie. It triggered memories of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice. Names etched into history, lives cut short by fear disguised as justice. Derek clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. If only he could undo the past. If only apologies carried weight equal to regret. Later that evening, Lex found herself walking along the frozen Potomac River, her breath visible in the frosty air. Jazz played softly through her earbuds, grounding her amidst swirling thoughts. She stopped near a bench overlooking the water, pulling out her phone to reread the anonymous message. Its cryptic phrasing suggested insider knowledge, someone aware of her role in exposing corruption within government agencies. Patriots Cross, perhaps? Or simply another shadow lurking in the periphery. Her hand instinctively went to her forearm, fingers brushing the raised scar tissue. The fire that had claimed so many lives still burned vividly in her memory. She'd survived because others hadn't, children whose faces she could never forget. Their deaths weighed heavily on her conscience, fueling her relentless pursuit of justice. Yet tonight, doubt crept in. Was vengeance truly worth the cost? Or was she merely perpetuating cycles of violence, trading one form of oppression for another? Nearby, Derek wandered aimlessly through Georgetown, avoiding crowded areas where his uniform might draw attention. His badge lay discarded in a drawer, collecting dust alongside unused commendations and faded photographs. He passed a mural dedicated to George Floyd, its bold colors standing defiant against bleak surroundings. For a moment he paused, reading the inscription below, "I can't breathe." Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the words. He thought of the boy he'd killed. His name, Marcus Johnson, whispered like a prayer. Derek had memorized everything about Marcus. His favorite basketball team, the Lakers. His dreams of becoming an engineer. The way his mother screamed when they delivered the news. These details weren't facts. They were weights chained to his soul. He wiped his face angrily, cursing himself for weakness. Redemption didn't come easy, it required sacrifice. But what price was too high to pay? Back at HQ, Lex reviewed surveillance footage of recent Patriots Cross activities. The group operated covertly, targeting individuals of color employed by federal agencies. Several agents had received threatening messages identical to hers. Whoever orchestrated these attacks knew precisely how to exploit vulnerabilities, both personal and systemic. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, there was no voicemail, just a text containing a single image, a black rose lying atop a blood-stained badge. Beneath it, a caption read, "Some debts can't be repaid." Lex's pulse quickened. The symbolism was unmistakable. The black rose represented resilience amid adversity, a motif woven throughout black culture and art. Yet paired with the bloody badge, it took on sinister undertones. Was this a warning? A threat? Or perhaps a plea for help? She forwarded the image to tech support, requesting analysis. Meanwhile, she decided to confront Derek directly. Whether ally or adversary, he held pieces of the puzzle she desperately needed to solve. That night, Lex drove to Derek's apartment, parking discreetly down the block. She hesitated before knocking, unsure whether approaching him was wise or reckless. When he answered the door, surprise flickered across his face, quickly masked by suspicion. "Agent Carter," he said stiffly. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "I need answers," she replied without preamble. "About last night. About your resignation. About..." She trailed off, holding up her phone to display the black rose image. "This." Derek paled visibly, stepping aside to let her in. They sat across from each other in silence, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on them like storm clouds. Slowly, haltingly, Derek began to speak. Not defending himself, but confessing. Admitting failures, regrets, fears. Lex listened intently, recognizing echoes of her own battles in his words. By the time she left, dawn was breaking over the horizon. Neither trusted the other completely, but a fragile bond had formed, a tentative alliance forged from shared pain and mutual understanding. As Lex drove away, she realized something crucial. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about healing wounds even when they refused to close entirely. And perhaps, just perhaps, Derek Hale might still deserve redemption. The city buzzed with an uneasy energy, its streets alive with whispers of unrest. News outlets reported escalating tensions between pro-police groups advocating for Blue Lives Matter and activists rallying under the banner of Black Lives Matter. Washington, D.C. stood at the epicenter of this ideological storm, a battleground where every word carried weight, every action bore consequence. Lex sat in her unmarked sedan outside a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town. Her laptop displayed live surveillance footage from Patriots Cross safehouses scattered throughout the region. The images were grainy but telling. Masked figures exchanging encrypted devices, stockpiling weapons, mapping out government buildings. These weren't mere protests. They were planning something far more sinister. Her phone vibrated against the dashboard. Another anonymous message. "You're running out of time." She exhaled sharply, leaning back into her seat. Time wasn't just slipping away, it was being yanked from her grasp like sand through clenched fingers. And now, to complicate matters further, she had Derek Hale hovering awkwardly beside her car. He'd insisted on tagging along after she reached out earlier in the week, claiming he wanted to make amends. Skeptical though she was, Lex knew she couldn't afford to dismiss potential allies, not when stakes were this high. "Are you going to sit there all day, or are we doing this?" Derek asked, his breath fogging up the cold air. His tone was gruff, masking nerves only someone trained to read body language could detect. Lex glanced at him, noting the tension in his posture. Despite his bravado, he looked like a man balancing on a razor-thin wire. One wrong step and everything would come crashing down, including whatever fragile trust they'd begun building. "We're doing it," she said, finally pocketing her phone. "But if you get in my way, I won't hesitate to leave you behind." Derek nodded grimly. No arguments. No protests. Just quiet acceptance tinged with determination. Inside the warehouse, shadows danced across crumbling walls, illuminated sporadically by flickering fluorescent lights. Lex moved silently, her boots barely making a sound against the dusty concrete floor. Derek followed closely behind, his own footsteps heavier but deliberate. Their contrasting styles reflected deeper differences. Lex methodical, calculating; Derek instinct-driven, reactive. They stopped near a stack of crates, crouching low as voices drifted toward them from around the corner. Two men, Patriots Cross operatives, argued heatedly about logistics. Snippets of conversation hinted at an upcoming operation targeting federal employees, including Lex herself. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to focus. Personal emotions had no place here. Derek tapped her shoulder lightly, pointing to a vent above them. It offered a clear vantage point into the adjacent room without exposing their position. Lex hesitated before nodding, trusting his judgment despite her reservations. Together, they climbed carefully, their movements synchronized despite their discordant personalities. Through the vent grill, they observed 3 additional operatives setting up surveillance equipment. Maps covered the table below, marked with red circles indicating locations of interest. One circle encircled Lex's home address. Her stomach churned, but she maintained composure. Turning to Derek, she whispered, "We need to disable those cameras. Can you handle it?" He met her gaze steadily. "I'll do what needs to be done." As Derek slipped away to sabotage the surveillance setup, Lex remained hidden, documenting evidence with her phone. Every photo, every recording could serve as proof later, if they survived long enough to present it. Back outside, adrenaline still coursing through their veins, Lex and Derek regrouped near the sedan. Night had fallen completely, cloaking them in darkness save for the occasional flash of distant headlights. Neither spoke immediately, each processing the night's events in their own way. "You didn't have to help me," Lex said, eventually breaking the silence. Her voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. "Why did you?" Derek shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "Because I screwed up once already. I don't intend to do it again." His answer surprised her, not because of its simplicity, but because of its honesty. For all his flaws, Derek possessed a stubborn streak of integrity buried beneath layers of guilt and shame. She recognized it because she carried something similar within herself. "And what happens next?" she pressed, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "Do you expect me to forgive you? Trust you?" "No," he replied bluntly. "I'm not asking for either. But maybe we can start over. As partners." Lex studied him closely, searching for signs of deception. Finding none, she exhaled slowly. "Fine. Partners. But remember this, one misstep and you're gone." Derek nodded solemnly. "Understood." Later that evening, Lex reviewed the intel gathered during their raid. Among the documents recovered was a handwritten note bearing a familiar name, Derek Hale. Not as operative, but as informant. According to the scribbled details, Derek had provided insider information to Patriots Cross leadership years ago, information used to target minority officers within the police department. Her heart sank as pieces clicked into place. Derek hadn't been coerced into lying during the 2019 shooting investigation. He'd been complicit. His resignation wasn't solely about guilt. It was damage control. Confronting him felt inevitable yet impossible. How could she reconcile her growing respect for him with this damning revelation? Yet part of her understood instinctively that people weren't defined solely by their worst decisions. Redemption required accountability, but also compassion. She decided to wait before addressing the issue directly. There would be time enough for reckoning later. For now, survival took precedence. That night, Lex returned home to find another black rose waiting on her doorstep. Unlike previous deliveries, this one came accompanied by a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, she discovered a line from Langston Hughes' poetry. Life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Her throat tightened as she traced the words with trembling fingers. The black rose symbolized resilience, yes, but also fragility. Like Derek, like herself, like countless others fighting battles invisible to the naked eye, she placed the flower gently on her kitchen counter beside Daniel's wedding ring. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh wounds. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, letting the music of Coltrane fill the empty spaces within her soul. The morning sun filtered weakly through heavy curtains, casting long shadows across Lex's cluttered living room. Papers sprawled over every available surface. Surveillance photos, transcripts, handwritten notes scrawled in her precise cursive. At the center of it all lay the black rose, its petals beginning to wilt but still striking against the pale wood of her coffee table. Lex sat cross-legged on the floor, poring over Derek's personnel file for what felt like the 100th time. Each line revealed fragments of a fractured life, commendations overshadowed by disciplinary actions, glowing reviews undercut by cryptic footnotes about questionable judgment. Yet none of it explained why he'd provided intel to Patriots Cross or whether he still harbored loyalties to them. Her phone buzzed insistently, pulling her attention away. It was HQ, requesting an update on her ongoing investigation. She hesitated before answering, weighing how much to reveal. Ultimately, she gave a vague response, citing leads she couldn't yet substantiate. The last thing she needed was interference from higher-ups who might see Derek as expendable. As she ended the call, her gaze drifted to Daniel's wedding ring resting nearby. Its weight wasn't just physical. It symbolized promises kept and broken, dreams deferred and reclaimed. For years, she'd carried his memory like armor, shielding herself from vulnerability. But lately, cracks had begun forming in that armor, letting emotions seep through. And Derek, he was complicating things further. Later that afternoon, Lex visited a retired detective named Marcus Reed, one of Derek's former colleagues. Reed lived in a modest suburban home filled with framed photographs and mementos of a career spanning 3 decades. He greeted her warmly but grew guarded when she mentioned Derek's name. "Derek Hale," Reed repeated slowly, shaking his head. "That kid's got more demons than most people I've met combined." Lex leaned forward, pen poised over her notebook. "What do you mean?" Reed sighed, settling into his armchair. He tried to play by the rules, at first anyway. But after the shooting in 19, something snapped. He started questioning everything. Orders, procedures, even himself. Then came the rumors about him feeding info to outside groups. No proof, mind you, but enough to raise eyebrows. "Do you think he acted alone?" Lex asked carefully. Reed shrugged. "Hard to say. Some folks thought he was pressured into it, blackmail, maybe. Others figured he believed he was doing the right thing. Either way, it cost him dearly." Lex thanked him and left, her mind racing. Pressure or misguided idealism. Both scenarios painted Derek as a man caught between impossible choices, a position she understood too well. That evening, Lex met Derek at a quiet jazz club tucked away in Capitol Hill. She'd suggested the meeting under the guise of discussing strategy, though her real motive was less professional. Jazz music swirled around them, smoky saxophones mingling with soft piano chords. They sat at a corner table, drinks untouched between them. "You didn't have to come," Derek said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "I wanted to," Lex replied simply. She reached into her bag, pulling out a folder containing copies of the documents implicating him. "This arrived earlier today." Derek stiffened visibly, his fingers curling tightly around his glass. When he spoke, his tone was raw, unfiltered. "You're wondering if I'm still working with them?" "No," Lex said firmly. "I'm wondering why you did it in the first place." For a moment, Derek looked like he might bolt. Then he slumped back in his chair, defeat etched into every line of his face. It wasn't about loyalty to them or anyone else. It was survival. "After the shooting, they threatened my family. My mom, especially. I didn't see another way out." His admission hung heavy in the air, mingling with the music. Lex studied him closely, searching for deception. Finding none, she exhaled sharply. "And now, Derek trailed off, his gaze dropping to the table. "Now I'm trying to make sense of the mess I created. To fix what can be fixed." Lex nodded slowly, understanding flickering in her eyes. "Then we'll fix it together." Over the next few days, Lex and Derek worked tirelessly to decode encrypted messages intercepted during their raid on the warehouse. Their partnership evolved into something akin to a delicate dance, each step tentative yet purposeful. Lex brought meticulous planning and strategic insight. Derek contributed instinctive problem-solving and eidetic recall. Together, they uncovered patterns linking Patriots Cross operatives to corrupt officials within federal agencies. One breakthrough came unexpectedly late one night. While reviewing surveillance footage, Derek noticed a recurring figure appearing in multiple locations. The man wore a distinctive silver ring on his left hand, a detail triggering a memory buried deep within Derek's mind. "That's Victor Kane," he said suddenly, pointing to the screen. "He used to run ops for the department before getting fired for misconduct. If anyone knows how Patriots Cross operates, it's him." Lex's eyes narrowed. "Where can we find him?" Derek hesitated. "Last I heard, he was holed up in Baltimore. But going after him won't be easy. He doesn't take kindly to visitors." "We don't have a choice," Lex replied grimly. "If he has answers, we need them." Before heading to Baltimore, Lex stopped by her mother's grave, a ritual she performed whenever facing uncertainty. Kneeling beside the headstone, she placed a fresh bouquet of black roses alongside Daniel's wedding ring. Her mother's teachings echoed in her mind. "Don't let them taint your compassion," she whispered softly. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am." Back in the car, she played Langston Hughes' poem aloud, its words grounding her amidst swirling doubts. Jazz accompanied her journey, blending cultural heritage with contemporary struggle. For Lex, these elements weren't mere aesthetics. They were lifelines anchoring her to hope amid despair. In Baltimore, Lex and Derek tracked Victor Kane to an abandoned factory on the waterfront. As they approached cautiously, shadows moved within the dimly lit interior. Voices drifted toward them, sharp and urgent. "They know we're onto them," Derek murmured, gripping his weapon tightly. Lex nodded, her expression grim. "Then we'd better move fast." Before they could act, headlights pierced the darkness behind them. Tires screeched as multiple vehicles surrounded the factory, cutting off escape routes. Figures emerged, clad in tactical gear emblazoned with the Patriots Cross insignia. Well, a voice drawled mockingly. "Looks like we've got ourselves some rats in a trap." Lex exchanged a glance with Derek, resolve hardening in both their eyes. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The factory loomed like a monolith against the darkened Baltimore skyline, its skeletal frame illuminated faintly by moonlight filtering through cracks in rusted walls. Inside, shadows danced across the floor as Patriots Cross operatives moved with calculated precision. Their voices echoed sharply, orders barked, weapons checked, plans confirmed. Lex and Derek crouched behind a stack of crates near the entrance, hearts pounding in unison but for different reasons. For Lex, it was adrenaline sharpening her focus. For Derek, it was fear, not of death, but of failure. Failure to protect Lex, to redeem himself, to atone for sins he feared were beyond forgiveness. "We need to split up," Lex whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of machinery. "You take the east corridor, I'll head west. Meet back here in 10 minutes. Derek shook his head firmly. "No way. We stick together. Her gaze snapped to his, sharp and unyielding. This isn't up for debate. If we stay together, we're sitting ducks. Alone, we have a better chance. He hesitated, torn between instinct and logic. Finally, he relented with a terse nod. Fine. But if anything happens, don't worry about me, she interrupted, her tone softening ever so slightly. Just do your job. As they separated, each carrying fragments of shared resolve, the weight of their decisions pressed down on them like storm clouds ready to burst. Alone in the labyrinthine corridors of the factory, Lex allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. She leaned against a cold metal beam, closing her eyes briefly as memories flooded her consciousness. Her mother's voice whispered softly, "Dignity isn't given, it's earned through acts of kindness, even when the world tries to harden your heart." Kindness. The word felt foreign amid chaos, yet it resonated deeply. Daniel had embodied kindness, a quiet strength that inspired others without demanding recognition. And now, here she was, surrounded by enemies, questioning whether her pursuit of justice had devolved into something darker. She touched the scar tissue on her forearm absently, remembering the fire that claimed so many lives, including children she hadn't been able to save. Every mark told a story. Every loss carved a piece of her soul away. Yet she kept moving forward, driven by a promise made long ago, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Meanwhile, Derek navigated the opposite side of the factory, his eidetic memory replaying every detail of recent events in excruciating clarity. He saw again the look on Lex's face when she confronted him about feeding intel to Patriots Cross, not anger, but disappointment. Disappointment cut deeper than rage because it implied expectation. Expectation meant belief. Belief meant hope, and Derek wasn't sure he deserved any of those things. His footsteps faltered as he passed a shattered mirror leaning against the wall. His reflection stared back at him, distorted and fragmented. He thought of Marcus Johnson, the boy whose life he'd ended, and wondered if redemption was even possible after such irreversible harm. Yet amidst despair, a spark remained. Lex believed in him, or at least she was trying to. That alone gave him reason to keep fighting. 10 minutes passed agonizingly slowly. By the time Lex and Derek reunited at their designated meeting point, the situation had grown dire. Patriots Cross operatives had discovered their presence and were systematically hunting them down. Echoes of gunfire ricocheted through the cavernous space, followed by shouted commands and the metallic clang of boots on grated flooring. "We need to move," Lex said urgently, scanning their surroundings for an exit. "They've got us boxed in." Derek nodded grimly, gesturing toward a narrow staircase leading to the roof. "Up there. There's a maintenance hatch, we can use it to escape onto the adjacent building." Without hesitation, they sprinted toward the stairs, dodging debris and ducking beneath low-hanging beams. Behind them, shouts grew louder as their pursuers closed in. Bullets whizzed past, striking sparks off the metal railing. Lex stumbled momentarily but regained her footing, propelled forward by sheer determination. Reaching the rooftop, they found the hatch sealed shut with a heavy padlock. Derek immediately set to work prying it open while Lex covered their backs, firing warning shots to deter advancing operatives. Sweat dripped from his brow as he strained against the lock, muscles burning with effort. Finally, with a loud clang, it gave way. "Go!" Derek shouted, shoving the hatch open. Lex climbed through first, followed closely by Derek. They emerged onto the adjacent building's rooftop, gasping for breath as the sounds of pursuit faded below. Safe for now, they collapsed onto the rooftop's rough surface, chests heaving as adrenaline ebbed away. The city stretched out before them, a tapestry of lights and shadows. Silence settled between them, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. "I almost didn't make it," Lex admitted quietly, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. "Back there, I thought." "You did make it," Derek interjected firmly, turning to face her. "Because you don't give up. Ever." His words caught her off guard, stirring emotions she'd buried beneath layers of stoicism. She looked at him then, not as a former cop or informant, but as a man grappling with his own demons while still finding ways to protect others. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, her tone softer than intended. "After everything you've done, why risk your life for someone like me?" Derek hesitated, searching for an answer that wouldn't sound trite or self-serving. Because maybe saving you means saving myself, he said eventually. And because he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Because what? Lex prompted gently. Because I care, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. About you. About making things right. Even if it's too late. Lex studied him silently, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she reached out, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. No words passed between them, but the gesture spoke volumes. Acknowledgement, gratitude, perhaps even understanding. Their reprieve was short-lived. Moments later, a helicopter appeared overhead, its searchlights slicing through the darkness. Patriots Cross reinforcements had arrived, armed and relentless. Lex cursed under her breath, grabbing Derek's arm. We need to keep moving. They scrambled across rooftops, leaping gaps and scaling fire escapes with desperate urgency. Each step brought them closer to freedom, but also closer to exhaustion. When they finally reached ground level, slipping into a narrow alleyway, both were drenched in sweat and shaking with fatigue. We can't keep running forever, Derek panted, leaning heavily against a brick wall. They'll find us eventually. Lex nodded grimly, pulling out her phone to review surveillance footage captured earlier. An idea began forming in her mind, one risky enough to tilt the odds in their favor. There's another way, she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. But it requires trust. Derek met her gaze steadily. You have mine. With that simple declaration, they forged ahead, bound not just by necessity but by fragile yet undeniable connection. As they prepared to execute their plan, Lex received another anonymous message. The clock is ticking. Choose wisely. She glanced at Derek, resolve hardening in her eyes. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together or not at all. The city buzzed with an uneasy energy, its streets alive with whispers of unrest. News outlets reported escalating tensions between pro-police groups advocating for Blue Lives Matter and activists rallying under the banner of Black Lives Matter. Washington, D.C. stood at the epicenter of this ideological storm, a battleground where every word carried weight, every action bore consequence. Lex sat in her unmarked sedan outside a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town. Her laptop displayed live surveillance footage from Patriots Cross safehouses scattered throughout the region. The images were grainy but telling, masked figures exchanging encrypted devices, stockpiling weapons, mapping out government buildings. These weren't mere protests, they were planning something far more sinister. Her phone vibrated against the dashboard. Another anonymous message. You're running out of time. She exhaled sharply, leaning back into her seat. Time wasn't just slipping away. It was being yanked from her grasp like sand through clenched fingers. And now, to complicate matters further, she had Derek Hale hovering awkwardly beside her car. He'd insisted on tagging along after she reached out earlier in the week, claiming he wanted to make amends. Skeptical though she was, Lex knew she couldn't afford to dismiss potential allies. Not when stakes were this high. Are you going to sit there all day, or are we doing this? Derek asked, his breath fogging up the cold air. His tone was gruff, masking nerves only someone trained to read body language could detect. Lex glanced at him, noting the tension in his posture. Despite his bravado, he looked like a man balancing on a razor-thin wire. One wrong step and everything would come crashing down, including whatever fragile trust they'd begun building. We're doing it, she said finally, pocketing her phone. But if you get in my way, I won't hesitate to leave you behind. Derek nodded grimly. No arguments. No protests. Just quiet acceptance tinged with determination. Back at HQ, Lex met with Agent Rachel Kim, a sharp-eyed analyst from the FBI who specialized in counterterrorism operations. Rachel's presence signaled both support and scrutiny. She'd been assigned to oversee Lex's investigation into Patriots Cross, ostensibly to ensure cooperation between agencies. But Lex couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel's involvement ran deeper than official channels. They've infiltrated multiple departments, Rachel explained, spreading files across the table. Local PDs, federal agencies, even private contractors. Whoever's pulling the strings has resources we can't match. Lex studied the documents carefully, her mind racing. Among them was a name that sent chills down her spine. Victor Kane. The disgraced former detective Derek had identified wasn't just a loose end. He was central to Patriots Cross operations. Worse still, internal communications suggested Kane had informants within the FBI itself. "Do you trust anyone here?" Lex asked bluntly. Rachel hesitated before answering. "Not completely. But I trust you to do what's necessary." It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. Later that evening, Lex introduced Derek to Marcus Reed, the retired detective who'd provided insight into Derek's past. Reed agreed to help, though reluctantly, citing concerns about drawing attention to himself. His knowledge of departmental politics proved invaluable, offering clues about how Patriots Cross recruited operatives and manipulated systems. "You're playing a dangerous game," Reed warned Lex as they left his home. "These people don't play fair." "We never expected them to," Lex replied evenly. Over the next few days, Lex and Derek devised a plan to dismantle Patriots Cross leadership. Operating out of a secure location, a nondescript apartment rented under false credentials, they spent hours analyzing intel, debating tactics, and preparing contingencies. Their contrasting approaches created friction but also balance. Lex's methodical precision complemented Derek's instinct-driven adaptability. One night, as they pored over maps and blueprints, Derek leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This feels reckless," he admitted. "What happens if we fail?" Lex didn't look up from her notes. "We don't have the luxury of failure." Her response stung, not because it lacked compassion, but because it underscored the stakes. They weren't fighting for pride or revenge, they were fighting for survival. For justice. For futures they might never see but refuse to abandon. Still, Derek pressed on. "And if we succeed? What then? Do we go back to our separate lives? Pretend none of this happened?" Lex paused, considering his words. She wanted to say yes, to insist that professional detachment was their best defense against emotional entanglement. But the truth was messier. Over weeks of working together, their bond had grown stronger, defying logic and self-preservation alike. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," she said finally, her voice softer than intended. "For now, focus on staying alive." Despite their mutual resolve to remain professional, subtle flirtations began creeping into their interactions. Late-night strategy sessions often stretched into early mornings, jazz records spinning softly in the background as they debated logistics and shared stories of personal loss. Derek teased Lex about her meticulous note-taking. She countered by mocking his tendency to pace while thinking aloud. One evening, after an especially grueling day, Lex poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed one to Derek without comment. He accepted it gratefully, raising his glass in silent acknowledgement. Neither spoke for several minutes, content simply to exist in each other's company. "You remind me of Daniel," Lex blurted suddenly, surprising herself as much as him. "Not physically, obviously, but in how you approach problems. You think you're broken beyond repair, but you keep showing up anyway." Derek stared at her, stunned by the comparison. "I'm nothing like him," he murmured. "He was better than me." "No," Lex corrected gently. "He wasn't perfect. None of us are. That's why we fight for the people who deserve better." Her words lingered between them, bridging gaps neither had realized existed. For the first time, Derek allowed himself to imagine a future where redemption wasn't just possible, it was attainable. Their operation launched on schedule, targeting a Patriots Cross safe house suspected of housing key operatives. Everything went according to plan at first. Lex and Derek infiltrated the building undetected, gathering evidence and planting tracking devices. But as they prepared to withdraw, alarms blared, shattering the illusion of control. Betrayal struck swiftly and brutally. Someone within their network, a trusted ally, had leaked their position to Patriots Cross. Armed assailants swarmed the building, cutting off escape routes and forcing them into a desperate standoff. Cornered in a storage room, Lex turned to Derek, her expression resolute. "You need to create a distraction. Give me time to upload the data." "No," Derek snapped. "We stick together." "There's no other way," she insisted, gripping his arm tightly. "Trust me." Reluctantly, Derek obeyed, charging into the fray with reckless abandon. Gunfire erupted around him, bullets grazing his shoulder as he fought valiantly to draw attention away from Lex. Meanwhile, she worked feverishly to transmit the stolen intel, sweat dripping from her brow as seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly. When the upload completed, Lex emerged from hiding, firing cover shots to aid Derek's retreat. Together, they fought their way to safety, battered but alive. As they collapsed onto the pavement outside, gasping for breath, Lex whispered hoarsely, "We made it." Derek managed a weak smile, blood trickling from a wound on his forehead. "Told you I'd watch your back." That night, Lex played Langston Hughes' poetry aloud, letting his words resonate deeply. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? The black rose reappeared unexpectedly, a single bloom delivered anonymously alongside a cryptic note reading, "Even shadows bow to light." Lex placed the flower beside Daniel's wedding ring, reflecting on resilience amid despair. Jazz music filled the silence, blending cultural heritage with contemporary struggle. For Lex, these elements weren't mere aesthetics, they were lifelines anchoring her to hope amid chaos. The aftermath of their narrow escape left Lex and Derek battered but alive, though not unscathed. They huddled in a dingy motel room on the outskirts of D.C., its peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent light casting an eerie glow over their makeshift sanctuary. Blood-stained bandages wrapped Derek's shoulder, a stark reminder of the cost of their survival. Lex sat cross-legged on the edge of one bed, laptop balanced precariously on her knees as she decrypted files retrieved from the safe house. Outside, rain hammered against the windows, muffling the distant hum of passing cars. Inside, silence reigned save for the rhythmic tapping of Lex's fingers on the keyboard. Each keystroke felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the knowledge that someone they trusted had betrayed them. "Whoever leaked our position knew exactly what they were doing," Lex said finally, breaking the quiet. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of anger, a tightly coiled spring threatening to snap. Derek winced as he shifted his injured arm, pain etched into every line of his face. "Could have been anyone," he muttered bitterly. "Rachel. Reed. Even someone higher up." Lex shook her head firmly. "Not Rachel. She wouldn't risk exposure like that. Not with her career on the line." "You sure about that?" Derek pressed, his tone sharper than intended. "People lie, Lex. You know that better than anyone." She met his gaze evenly, searching for accusation but finding only frustration. "I'm not ruling her out completely. But right now, we need answers, not assumptions." Her words hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of antiseptic and damp carpet. Both understood the stakes. Betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Whoever fed information to Patriots Cross had access to classified networks, suggesting corruption ran deeper than either cared to admit. Hours later, Lex received an encrypted message from an unknown source. It contained coordinates leading to a remote cabin outside the city, accompanied by a single line of text. "Truth hides where fear reigns." Derek frowned as she showed him the message. "Could be a trap." "It almost certainly is a trap," Lex replied grimly. "But we don't have a choice. If this leads us closer to whoever's pulling the strings." Derek nodded reluctantly. "Then let's move fast." They arrived at the cabin just before dawn, the forest surrounding it cloaked in mist and shadow. The structure itself was decrepit, its wooden planks warped and splintered from years of neglect. As they approached cautiously, Lex noticed something odd, no signs of surveillance or ambush. Just silence. Inside, they found evidence confirming their worst fears. Documents detailing financial transactions linked Patriots Cross leadership to high-ranking officials within federal agencies. One name stood out prominently, Rachel Kim. Lex's stomach churned as realization dawned. Rachel hadn't been sent to assist, they'd used her to monitor Lex's movements, feeding intel directly to their enemies. Betrayal cut deeper than bullets, severing bonds Lex hadn't realized she valued until they were broken. "She played us," Lex whispered hoarsely, clutching the documents tightly. "All along, she was working for them." Derek placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her amidst the storm of emotions. "We'll deal with her later. For now, focus on what matters." Lex nodded slowly, swallowing hard. Revenge could wait, justice couldn't. As they prepared to leave the cabin, movement outside caught Derek's attention. Through a cracked window, he spotted armed operatives closing in, their silhouettes barely visible through the fog. Realizing they were surrounded, Derek turned to Lex urgently. "I'll draw them away," he said firmly. You take the evidence and get out of here. No, Lex snapped instinctively. We're not splitting up again. This isn't negotiable, Derek countered, his voice unwavering despite the fear flashing in his eyes. You're more important than me, Lex. What you carry, that data, it can bring them down. My life doesn't matter if it means keeping you safe. His words struck a chord deep within her, resonating with memories of Daniel and promises made long ago. Still, she hesitated, torn between duty and emotion. Don't make me regret trusting you, she said finally, her voice trembling. You won't, Derek promised, forcing a smile despite the gravity of the situation. Just don't forget who I am when this is over. Before she could respond, he slipped out the back door, drawing fire with a series of calculated movements. Gunshots echoed through the forest as Lex sprinted in the opposite direction, clutching the encrypted drive tightly. Every step felt like betrayal, leaving Derek behind to face danger alone. Yet she knew his sacrifice wasn't born of recklessness, it was redemption personified. Back at HQ, Lex reviewed the stolen documents in private, piecing together the full scope of Patriots Cross operations. Among the files was a recording of Rachel admitting her role in leaking Lex's position. Her confession revealed not only greed but desperation. A woman manipulated into complicity by threats against her family. Lex stared at the screen, conflicted. Part of her wanted vengeance, demanded accountability. But another part, the part shaped by her mother's teachings, recognized the humanity beneath the betrayal. People weren't defined solely by their worst decisions. They were capable of change, however difficult. Meanwhile, Derek managed to evade capture, though not without sustaining additional injuries. He rendezvoused with Lex hours later at a prearranged location, his face pale but resolute. You shouldn't have done that, Lex said softly, her voice thick with emotion. You could have died. But I didn't, Derek replied simply. And neither did you. That's what matters. She studied him closely, seeing not just a man burdened by guilt but someone determined to reclaim his honor, even at great personal cost. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of redemption, not just for Derek, but for everyone willing to fight for it. That night, Lex returned to her apartment, placing the black rose beside Daniel's wedding ring once more. Its petals were wilting, yet it remained beautiful, a symbol of resilience amid fragility. She played Langston Hughes' poetry aloud, letting his words echo through empty spaces. Life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Yet even birds with broken wings found ways to soar if given enough reason to try. Jazz music swirled around her, blending sorrow with solace. For Lex, these elements weren't mere aesthetics, they were anchors tethering her to hope amid chaos. And Derek, he was becoming something unexpected, proof that scars could heal, wounds could mend, and trust could be rebuilt, one fragile connection at a. The suburban safe house stood inconspicuously at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its beige siding blending seamlessly with neighboring homes. To an outsider, it appeared ordinary, a place where families gathered for barbecues or children played on swing sets. But inside, tension crackled like static electricity. Lex paced the living room, her phone clutched tightly in one hand. The encrypted drive containing evidence against Patriots Cross rested securely in her jacket pocket. Around her, 6 witnesses, men, women, and children, huddled together, their faces etched with fear. These individuals had risked everything to testify against corruption within federal agencies, and now their lives depended on Lex's ability to protect them. Derek sat near the window, his eyes scanning the street through binoculars. His shoulder wound throbbed painfully, but he ignored it, focusing instead on signs of danger. They're coming, he said finally, his voice low and urgent. 3 vehicles, heading straight for us. Lex cursed under her breath, quickly ushering the witnesses into a fortified basement. She handed each person a flashlight and instructions: stay silent, stay hidden, and trust no one but her. As she locked the heavy metal door behind them, she exchanged a glance with Derek. Ready? She asked, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied grimly, checking his weapon one last time. Outside, headlights pierced the darkness, casting long shadows across the lawn. Armed operatives spilled out of the vehicles, moving with military precision. Their leader, a tall figure clad in tactical gear, gestured toward the house, signaling the attack. The siege began with a deafening crash as Patriots Cross operatives breached the front door using a battering ram. Lex and Derek took cover behind overturned furniture, returning fire with disciplined accuracy. Bullets tore through walls, shattering windows and sending shards of glass raining down like hail. For hours, the battle raged on, neither side willing to yield. Lex's training kicked in automatically, her movements fluid, her aim precise. She coordinated with Derek via hand signals, their partnership seamless despite the chaos. When ammunition ran low, they scavenged weapons from fallen enemies, adapting to survive. At one point, Derek spotted a group attempting to flank them through the backyard. He signaled to Lex, who nodded sharply before creating a diversion by firing a burst of rounds toward the front entrance. While the attackers regrouped, Derek slipped outside, engaging the flanking team in close combat. His eidetic memory allowed him to anticipate their movements, giving him a crucial edge. By the time reinforcements arrived, he'd neutralized the threat, though not without sustaining additional injuries. Inside, Lex held her ground, protecting the basement door at all costs. Sweat dripped from her brow as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Each shot fired felt like a lifeline keeping death at bay, but she knew their position was untenable. Reinforcements wouldn't arrive in time. They were on their own. During a brief lull in the fighting, Lex and Derek found themselves cornered in the kitchen, barricaded behind a shattered island counter. Breathing heavily, they exchanged weary glances, exhaustion etched into every line of their faces. "You don't have to do this," Lex said suddenly, her voice barely audible over distant gunfire. "You've already done enough." Derek shook his head firmly. "I'm not leaving you. It's not about me," she countered, her tone softening. "It's about making peace with yourself. You've carried guilt for so long, Derek. Let this be your chance to let go." Her words struck a chord deep within him, stirring emotions he'd buried beneath layers of shame. For years, he'd believed redemption was beyond reach, that his mistakes defined him irrevocably. Yet here was Lex, offering absolution not because she owed it to him, but because she saw something worth saving. "I don't know how to forgive myself," he admitted hoarsely, his voice cracking under the weight of unspoken truths. "You don't have to figure it out alone," she replied gently. "That's what I'm here for." Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the world around him. In that moment, stripped of pretense and pride, he realized the depth of Lex's compassion, not just for others, but for him. It wasn't pity, it was understanding born of shared pain. Before either could say more, the sound of approaching footsteps jolted them back to reality. They readied their weapons, steeling themselves for another wave of attacks. As dawn broke, the situation grew increasingly dire. Ammunition depleted, defenses crumbling, Lex made a desperate decision. "Take the witnesses out through the tunnel," she ordered Derek. "I'll hold them off." "No," Derek snapped, gripping her arm tightly. "We stick together. Always. This isn't negotiable," Lex shot back, her gaze unwavering. "You're the only one who knows the layout of the tunnels. If anyone can get them to safety, it's you." Reluctantly, Derek obeyed, leading the terrified group into the narrow passageway beneath the house. As they disappeared into darkness, Lex turned back to face the enemy, determination hardening her features. She planted explosives strategically throughout the lower level, ensuring the safe house would collapse once triggered. When the final assault came, Lex fought valiantly, her resolve unshaken even as bullets grazed her skin. Just as she prepared to detonate the charges, a figure emerged from the smoke, Derek, bloodied but alive, having returned to ensure she escaped. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, anger masking panic. "I told you I'm not leaving you," he replied simply, pulling her toward the tunnel entrance. Together, they fled mere seconds before the explosion rocked the foundation, collapsing the structure above them. Emerging into daylight, Lex and Derek collapsed onto the damp earth, gasping for breath as debris rained down around them. Behind them, flames consumed the remains of the safe house, a pyre marking both loss and survival. Lex reached into her pocket, retrieving Daniel's wedding ring and clutching it tightly. Beside her, Derek placed a trembling hand over hers, offering silent support. Neither spoke. Words seemed inadequate amid such devastation. Yet amidst the wreckage, a single black rose lay untouched, its petals glistening with morning dew. Lex picked it up carefully, cradling it like a fragile promise. Jazz music drifted faintly from a nearby radio, blending sorrow with solace. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of healing, not just for Derek, but for herself. The aftermath of the safe house explosion left Lex and Derek battered but alive, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. They staggered through the woods surrounding the cul-de-sac, supporting each other as they put distance between themselves and the smoldering wreckage behind them. The witnesses were safe, at least for now, but Patriots Cross operatives continued to hunt them relentlessly. Lex paused to catch her breath, leaning against a tree as she surveyed Derek's injuries. Blood seeped through makeshift bandages wrapped around his torso and shoulder, staining his shirt crimson. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold morning air. "You're losing too much blood," she said sharply, her voice tinged with panic. "We need to find shelter." Derek shook his head weakly, forcing a grim smile. "I'll be fine. Just keep moving." "No," Lex snapped, gripping his arm tightly. "You're not fine. You've done enough, more than anyone could ask of you. Let me take care of you." Her words caught him off guard, stirring emotions he'd spent years suppressing. For so long, he believed himself unworthy of compassion, of forgiveness. Yet here was Lex, refusing to let him give up even when survival seemed impossible. "Why do you care so much?" he asked hoarsely, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of approaching vehicles. "Because I see you, Derek," she replied softly, her gaze unwavering. "Not the mistakes you've made, but the man trying to make amends. And because I don't want to lose someone else who matters to me." Her admission hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of charred wood and frost-covered leaves. For a moment, neither spoke, content simply to exist in each other's presence. Moments later, the sound of engines shattered their fragile calm. Patriots Cross reinforcements had arrived, cutting off escape routes and forcing them into a desperate standoff. Lex and Derek exchanged a glance, wordless understanding passing between them. This was it, the final confrontation. "We can't outrun them," Derek said finally, his tone resolute. "But we can buy time for the others." "No," Lex protested fiercely. "We stick together. That's what we agreed. This isn't about agreements. It's about doing what's necessary," Derek countered, his voice steady despite the fear flashing in his eyes. "Take the encrypted drive and get out of here. Find Rachel. Expose everything." "I'm not leaving you," Lex insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "Not after everything we've been through." "You have to," Derek replied firmly, placing a hand on her cheek. "Promise me you'll finish what we started." Before she could respond, he turned away, limping toward the source of the noise. Lex hesitated, torn between duty and emotion. Finally, she whispered hoarsely, "Don't die on me." "I won't," Derek promised, forcing a smile despite the gravity of the situation. "Just don't forget who I am when this is over." With that, he disappeared into the trees, drawing fire with a series of calculated movements. Gunshots echoed through the forest as Lex sprinted in the opposite direction, clutching the encrypted drive tightly. Every step felt like betrayal, leaving Derek behind to face danger alone. Yet she knew his sacrifice wasn't born of recklessness, it was redemption personified. Derek moved swiftly, luring Patriots Cross operatives deeper into the woods. He used his eidetic memory to anticipate their movements, setting traps and creating diversions to slow their advance. Despite his injuries, he fought with a ferocity born of desperation, determined to protect Lex and the witnesses at all costs. When cornered near a rocky outcrop, he detonated a makeshift explosive device, eliminating most of the assailants in a fiery blast. Flames licked at his skin as he collapsed to his knees, pain radiating through every nerve ending. Still, he managed to activate a secondary charge, ensuring the remaining operatives wouldn't survive the aftermath. As consciousness began to slip away, Derek thought of Marcus Johnson, the boy whose life he'd ended, and whispered a final apology. Then, closing his eyes, he allowed himself to drift into darkness, comforted by the knowledge that his death would save countless others. Hours later, Lex returned to the site of Derek's last stand, her heart pounding with dread. Smoke still lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of burnt earth and gunpowder. She found his body amidst the wreckage, his badge clutched tightly in one hand. Tears streamed down her face as she knelt beside him, cradling his head in her lap. "I'm sorry," she whispered brokenly, pressing his badge to her chest. "I promised I wouldn't forget you, and I won't. Not ever." She retrieved a black rose from her pocket, placing it gently on his chest before standing to leave. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by guilt and sorrow. Yet she forced herself to move forward, driven by a promise she couldn't break. Not to Derek, not to herself. Back at HQ, Lex confronted Rachel Kim, presenting the evidence Derek had sacrificed his life to protect. The documents implicated high-ranking officials within federal agencies, exposing the extent of Patriots Cross corruption. Rachel confessed under pressure, revealing how threats against her family had forced her into complicity. Lex ensured Rachel faced justice, not through vengeance, but accountability. She advocated for rehabilitation programs aimed at dismantling systemic oppression, recognizing that true change required addressing root causes rather than punishing symptoms. Meanwhile, the witnesses testified before Congress, their bravery inspiring widespread reforms within law enforcement. Lex watched silently from the sidelines, clutching Derek's badge tightly as lawmakers pledged to honor his memory through legislative action. That night, Lex visited Derek's grave, where she left Daniel's wedding ring beside a fresh bouquet of roses. For the first time since losing her husband, she allowed herself to grieve openly, not just for Derek, but for everyone whose lives had been claimed by violence and injustice. She played Langston Hughes' poetry aloud, letting his words echo through empty spaces. "Life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Yet even birds with broken wings found ways to soar, if given enough reason to try." Jazz music swirled around her, blending sorrow with solace. For Lex, these elements weren't mere aesthetics, they were anchors tethering her to hope amid chaos. And Derek, he was becoming something unexpected, proof that scars could heal, wounds could mend, and trust could be rebuilt one fragile connection at a time. Months had passed since the events that claimed Derek Hale's life, yet their impact rippled through Washington, D.C. like waves after a storm. The city stood transformed, not physically but in spirit. Reforms had begun sweeping through law enforcement agencies, fueled by testimony from survivors and evidence uncovered during Lex's mission. Streets once marked by fear now buzzed with cautious optimism, though scars remained etched into both landscapes and lives. Inside the Capitol building, cameras flashed relentlessly as lawmakers, activists, and citizens gathered for a historic moment, the unveiling of legislation aimed at dismantling systemic corruption within federal institutions. At the center of it all stood Alexis "Lex" Carter, resplendent in a tailored navy suit, her posture unwavering despite the weight of countless eyes upon her. As she stepped up to the podium, silence fell over the chamber. Her gaze swept across the crowd, lingering briefly on familiar faces, including Marcus Reed, who nodded encouragingly from the front row. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "Today," Lex began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "we stand united not just in grief, but in hope. Hope that justice can prevail over injustice. Hope that redemption is possible even for those burdened by guilt. And hope that change, however difficult, begins with courage." She paused, allowing her words to resonate before continuing. Among those who fought tirelessly for this future was Derek Hale, a man whose story reminds us that no one is beyond saving. Derek bore the weight of his mistakes, carrying them as scars etched into his soul. Yet when given the chance to make amends, he chose sacrifice over self-preservation. He chose light over shadow. Her voice cracked slightly as she added, "Derek taught me, and all of us, that redemption isn't measured by perfection, but by effort. By the willingness to confront our darkest truths and emerge stronger for it." The audience erupted into applause, though Lex barely heard them. Her thoughts drifted back to Derek's final moments, the way he'd smiled through pain, the quiet resolve in his voice as he urged her to keep fighting. She clutched his badge tightly in her pocket, drawing strength from its presence. To honor Derek's legacy, she concluded, we must commit ourselves to building a world where no one feels compelled to choose between survival and morality, where badges symbolize service rather than power, and where justice serves not only the privileged but the vulnerable. With that, she stepped away from the podium, leaving behind a nation stirred by her words and inspired by the man they commemorated. Later that afternoon, Lex attended the dedication ceremony for a new exhibit at the Smithsonian Museum titled Shadows and Light: Stories of Redemption. Curators had worked tirelessly to curate artifacts representing resilience amid adversity, including Derek's badge and Lex's Medal of Honor. Together, these items formed the centerpiece of the display, accompanied by recordings of jazz music and Langston Hughes poetry. As visitors filed past the exhibit, many paused to reflect on its meaning. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking about the black rose encased beside the badges. Adults whispered explanations, recounting tales of bravery and sacrifice. For Lex, watching silently from the sidelines, the scene felt surreal, a testament to humanity's capacity to heal and rebuild. When the crowd dispersed, she approached the display alone, running her fingers lightly over the glass case. Beside Derek's badge lay Daniel's wedding ring, polished to a dull shine. Together, they told a story of love, loss, and legacy, a narrative woven into the fabric of history. A museum guide approached hesitantly, holding out a small bouquet of black roses. "These arrived for you earlier," he said softly. "No card, just this note." Lex unfolded the paper, recognizing the handwriting instantly. It read, "Even shadows bow to light." Tears welled in her eyes as she placed the flowers beside the exhibit, whispering hoarsely, "Thank you." That evening, Lex returned home to find her apartment bathed in golden twilight. Jazz records lined the shelves, their covers worn from years of use. On the coffee table sat copies of Langston Hughes' poems, dog-eared pages marking favorite verses. Everything felt familiar yet different, as if imbued with newfound significance. She poured herself a glass of bourbon, settling onto the couch with Daniel's wedding ring cradled in her palm. For so long, she'd carried his memory like armor, shielding herself from vulnerability. But now she realized that true strength lay not in invulnerability, but in connection, in allowing others to see your scars and still believe in your worth. Her phone buzzed against the table, pulling her from her reverie. It was Rachel Kim calling to update her on ongoing reform efforts. Lex answered promptly, her tone professional but warm. "How are you holding up?" Rachel asked cautiously. "I'm okay," Lex replied honestly. "Better than I expected, actually. How about you?" "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, that redemption requires accountability but also compassion. I think I'm starting to understand." Lex smiled faintly, tracing the engraved date on Daniel's ring. "Good. That's progress." After ending the call, she turned off the lights and stepped onto her balcony, gazing out at the city skyline. Snow flurries danced lazily through the air, dissolving into slush on the asphalt below. Somewhere in the distance, church bells tolled midnight. For the first time in years, Lex felt a sense of peace, not because pain had disappeared, but because it coexisted with hope. Like the black rose, her journey had been defined by resilience amid fragility. And though battles remained ahead, she faced them not with fear, but with faith. As snow began to fall, Lex pulled her coat tighter around her, remembering her mother's words, "Dignity isn't given. It's earned through acts of kindness, even when the world tries to harden your heart." She smiled faintly, ready to face whatever came next. And somewhere, amidst the echoes of jazz and poetry, Derek's voice whispered softly, "You didn't forget who I am." Lex closed her eyes, letting the music fill the silence. For in that moment, surrounded by shadows and light, she knew she never would.